My father never said, "I love you." Instead, he secretly paid property taxes on a $380,000 house in my name for 20 years, and never told me. My name is Daniel. I'm 44 years old, I live in Columbus, Ohio, I work as a mid-level project manager for a logistics company, and until 6 weeks ago, I believed the most complicated thing in my relationship with my father was the silence between us. I was wrong. My father's name is Gerald Kowalski. He's 71, retired, and lives alone in the same house in Akron where I grew up, a 1970s split-level with aluminum siding and a driveway that always needed repaving. My mother, Susan, passed away from ovarian cancer 12 years ago. After the funeral, my father and I drifted. Not dramatically. No blow-up, no betrayal, no single moment I could point to. Just the slow, predictable erosion that happens between two people who never quite learn to talk to each other. We speak on holidays. We exchange birthday texts. When his neighbor called me 2 years ago to say he'd been hospitalized for a hernia, I drove up and stayed for a weekend. We watched football. We ate the casseroles his church friends dropped off. We didn't talk about anything real. That weekend felt like most of our adult relationship. Physically present, emotionally absent, and somehow still managing to feel like love in a language neither of us had fully translated. So you understand, there was no dramatic rift. No years of screaming fights. Just 20 years of two men who both chose silence as the primary mode of relating to each other, and who quietly built separate lives inside that silence. What I'm about to tell you is the story of how I found out that during those 20 years of silence, my father had been carrying a secret that was, by any measure, extraordinary. Part 1. The letter. It started with a letter. Not from my father. From a county tax office in Mecklenburg County, North Carolina. I almost threw it away. The envelope was thin, the kind that looks like junk mail, official government letterhead, my name typed in a font that suggested a printer from 2008. I stood over my kitchen recycling bin for a full 3 seconds before something made me open it. The letter was a courtesy notice. It informed me that the property tax payment for a parcel at 1147 Willowmere Drive, Charlotte, North Carolina, listed under my name, Daniel R. Kowalski, had been submitted by a third party using an automatic payment authorization that was set to expire. The county was notifying the owner of record to ensure continued arrangements. I read it 3 times. Then I sat down at my kitchen table and read it 3 more times. I have never lived in Charlotte. I have never purchased property in Charlotte. I have never, to my knowledge, owned any real estate beyond the condo I bought in Columbus in 2018. But according to Mecklenburg County's official tax records, I have been the legal owner of a house at 1147 Willowmere Drive since 2005. I was 24 years old in 2005. I was living in a studio apartment in Pittsburgh on $32,000 a year, eating ramen twice a week, and trying to pay off my student loans. I had no savings. I had no investment portfolio. I had no idea there was a house anywhere in the country with my name on it. I didn't call my father that night. I needed to understand what I was looking at before I had that conversation. So instead, I did what any panicking person does at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. I went down the rabbit hole. I pulled up the Mecklenburg County property records online. The parcel number matched the letter. Owner of record, Daniel R. Kowalski. Acquired, March 14, 2005. Current assessed value, $312,000. Market value estimate from the county's own appraisal tool, approximately $378,000 to $385,000. The property was a 3-bedroom, 2-bath ranch house, 1,680 square feet, on a quiet cul-de-sac in a neighborhood called Willowmere Crossing. I found it on Zillow. The most recent listing images were from a 2019 rental posting. The house had good bones, a mature oak in the front yard, an updated kitchen, new vinyl windows. The kind of house that looks like someone cared about it. And for 20 years, I hadn't known it existed. I lay awake that entire night. Part 2. The phone call. I waited a week before I called my father. That wasn't strategic so much as it was necessary. I needed the time to gather facts, to get my emotional state somewhere below volcanic, and to figure out what questions I actually wanted to ask. In the meantime, I called a real estate attorney in Columbus named Patricia Hale, who a colleague had used the year before. I explained the situation in about 4 minutes. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "So the property is legitimately in your name? You have documentation. The county has me as owner of record. The deed was recorded in 2005. And you had no knowledge of this purchase? None. Whatsoever. Was the property purchased with your social security number? Do you know if someone used your identity to acquire it?" "I don't know yet." That's part of what I'm trying to figure out. Okay, she said. Before you do anything else, order your full credit history and pull a title search on that property. You need to know if there are liens, if there's a mortgage in your name, if anyone else has any claim to it. And yes, you need to have that conversation with your father. I ordered the credit report that night. No mortgage associated with 1147 Willowmere Drive appeared anywhere. No liens. No outstanding debt tied to the property. The house, as far as the financial record was concerned, was free and clear. I called my father on a Saturday morning at 10 a.m. He picked up on the third ring. Danny. He always calls me Danny. What's going on? Hey, Dad. I had written out notes. I looked at them. I got a letter in the mail. From Mecklenburg County in North Carolina. About property taxes. Silence. Not the casual kind. The kind that has weight. Dad. Yeah. His voice had changed. Something in it had shifted, gotten quieter and more careful in the same breath. Is there something you want to tell me? Another pause. Then, in a voice that sounded older than I'd ever heard him sound, I always meant to tell you, Danny. I never found the right time. I closed my eyes. How long? Since 2005. March. That's 20 years, Dad. I know. You bought a house in my name 20 years ago and you never told me. I paid the taxes every year. Kept the insurance up. Had it rented out for a while, from 2007 to 2014. Put that rental income into a separate account. It's still there. I never touched it. I was gripping the phone so hard my knuckles were white. Why, Dad? Just tell me why. What he said next was something I had to ask him to repeat, because I didn't believe I'd heard it correctly the first time. When your mother got sick, he said slowly, before we knew how bad it was going to get, we sat down one night and talked about what we'd leave you. We didn't have much. The house in Akron. A little savings. Not enough, we knew that. Your mother found this property in Charlotte. It was a foreclosure, 2005, right after the real estate bubble started showing cracks. We got it for $118,000. She said, buy it for Danny. Put it in his name. Don't tell him, because if you tell him, he'll try to refuse it, and he's too stubborn to accept anything. I couldn't speak. She knew she was running out of time, Danny. She died 7 years later, but she knew. She wanted to know you'd have something. Something real. I kept it up because I promised her I would. And then I just didn't know how to bring it up. The years went by. Part 3, The Unraveling. I'm going to be honest with you, because that's the only way this story makes sense. My first reaction was not gratitude. My first reaction was a complicated, ugly knot of emotions that I'm still untangling. There was grief, because my mother had been the one who did this, and my mother had been dead for 12 years, and I had missed 12 years of being able to thank her. There was anger, a strange, disorienting anger at my father for keeping the secret for so long that I had lived 2 full decades not knowing my mother had done this for me. There was confusion, because the legal situation was not simple, and there was guilt, because somewhere underneath all of it was the uncomfortable awareness that I was now sitting on a $380,000 asset I'd done absolutely nothing to earn. And then, underneath all of that, was the question I couldn't get out of my head. What do I do with this? I called Patricia Hale back. I gave her the full story. She was quiet for a moment, then said, okay. The good news is that the property is legally yours. If the deed was recorded in your name in 2005 and there's no fraud involved, you are the legal owner. Your father has no ownership claim unless there's a trust document or legal agreement you're not aware of. He paid 20 years of property taxes, which doesn't grant him ownership. It means he has a potential claim for reimbursement of those expenses, depending on the circumstances, but that's a civil matter and frankly a complicated one. Do you want to pursue that? God, no, I said. I want to understand what I actually have and what my options are. Your options are, hold the property, sell it, or rent it. If you sell, depending on your tax situation, you may have capital gains exposure. You should talk to a CPA about the basis. If the property was purchased at $118,000 in 2005 and you sell at $380,000, there's a $262,000 gain that the IRS will want to discuss. I hired a CPA named Marcus Webb the following week. Marcus was methodical and unhurried and had the energy of a man who had seen every possible financial complication a family could generate. He did not blink when I told him the story. So the basis is $118,000, he said, making notes. And the current FMV is around $380,000. That's what the market estimates suggest. And you've owned it, legally, since 2005? Yes. Okay. You've exceeded the long-term capital gains holding period significantly. Depending on your income bracket, you're looking at either 0, 15, or 20% federal capital gains tax on the net gain, plus potential North Carolina state tax. If you sell, we're talking about a tax bill somewhere between $35,000 and $55,000 depending on your income this year and how the sale comes out. That still leaves you with somewhere in the $320,000 to $345,000 range after taxes. I sat with that number for a moment. Marcus, I said, is there a way to handle this that doesn't leave my father in a bad position? He looked at me over his reading glasses. What do you mean by that? He paid 20 years of taxes. He maintained the property. He honored a promise to my mother. I don't want him to end up in some legal gray zone where he's owed money or liable for something because of an arrangement that was, even if it was flawed, made out of love. Marcus nodded slowly. Then you want to do this cleanly. Document the gift, establish the basis properly, work with a real estate attorney to confirm the title is clear, and if you decide to sell, do it in a straightforward way that creates no ambiguity. Yes, I said. That's what I want. Update 1, 3 weeks after the letter. Patricia filed a title search on the property. Clean. No liens, no encumbrances, no competing claims. The deed was recorded properly in 2005 at the Mecklenburg County Register of Deeds, transferred from the original foreclosure sale, with me listed as sole owner. The rental income from the 2007 to 2014 period, which my father had deposited into a separate account, came to $43,200 after his self-reported expenses for repairs and management. He had kept every receipt. 19 years of receipts, organized in manila folders in a filing cabinet in his spare bedroom. When I drove to Akron to see them, I sat at his kitchen table and went through those folders. My father sat across from me and watched me read. He didn't say much. He made coffee. He put a plate of fig Newtons on the table. At one point he said, "I should have told you sooner, Danny." I know that. I looked up from a receipt for a new water heater, dated 2011. $1,240. My father's handwriting in blue pen, 1147 Willowmere, for Danny. Why didn't you? I asked. Not accusatory. Genuinely asking. He was quiet for a long time. You were building your own life. You didn't want anything from me. I could feel that. And every year I thought, this is the year, and then it felt like too much to explain. Like the longer I waited, the harder it got to start. I understood that. I hated that I understood it, but I did. I took the rental income account documents back to Marcus. He confirmed that the $43,200 should technically have been reported as income over those years. Mine, since I was the legal owner. Since it hadn't been, there was potential tax exposure. Marcus spent 2 weeks consulting with a tax specialist, and the conclusion was that given the circumstances and the amount, the most prudent course was to report it proactively and pay the back taxes with interest and penalties. The total bill, after the calculation, came to approximately $11,400. My father offered to pay it. I told him no. Update 2, 5 weeks after the letter. I decided to sell the house. This wasn't a quick or easy decision. I drove to Charlotte on a Tuesday in mid-March and stood in front of 1147 Willowmere Drive for about 20 minutes. The current tenant, the house had been vacant since 2014, per my father, but the county records showed a period of rental through a property management company, was gone. The house had been empty for 11 years. It looked it. The oak tree in the front yard was magnificent, 60 feet tall, spreading over the roof like an embrace. The driveway had cracked. The gutters needed replacing. The exterior paint was faded. Inside, per the property manager my father had used years ago, the kitchen update was still in decent shape, but the carpet in the bedrooms needed to come out and the HVAC was aging. I hired a local Charlotte realtor named James Whitfield to walk through the property with me. James had been in the Charlotte market for 22 years and had the measured confidence of someone who had seen every possible condition a house could be in. He walked through each room making quiet notes on his phone, then stood in the backyard and looked at the oak tree. With updates, he said, you're probably looking at $385,000 to $395,000. Without, as is to an investor, you'd be looking at $335,000 to $345,000. The mechanicals are dated but functional. The bones are good. That tree alone sells the yard. How long if we list? In this market, 4 to 6 weeks. Maybe faster if we price it right. I told him I wanted to do it properly. New carpet. Fresh exterior paint, HVAC inspection and any needed repairs. Gutters. James referred me to a contractor named Phil who came in with a quote of $28,500 for the full package. I authorized it. I called my father that evening and told him what I'd decided. Selling, he said. Yes. That's okay, Danny. It's yours. Whatever you want to do with it. I'm going to use some of the proceeds to do something, I said. But I want to talk to you about it first. Silence. The house in Akron, I said. Your roof. You told me 2 years ago it needed replacing and you hadn't gotten around to it. And the furnace, when did you last have it serviced? Danny. When, Dad? A pause. 2019. Right. So here's what I'm thinking. Update 3, 9 weeks after the letter. The house sold in 23 days. Final sale price, $388,500. After real estate commissions, 5.5%, split between buyer and seller agents, closing costs, the contractor work, and Marcus's calculated capital gains tax bill, I cleared $322,417. I sat in the parking lot of a Panera in Charlotte on the day of closing and looked at the wire confirmation on my phone for a long time. Then I called my father. It closed, I said. How much? He wasn't asking for himself. I could hear it in his voice. He was asking because he thought it might comfort me to say the number out loud. $322,000, after everything. He exhaled. Your mother would be pleased. I had to look out the windshield and wait a moment before I could speak. A family with 2 kids was crossing the parking lot with their Panera bags, and I watched them until I had my voice back. I'm setting aside the tax liability payment and an emergency fund, I told him. And I want to talk to you about the rest. You don't owe me anything, Danny. I know that. But here's what I've been thinking about for the last 2 months. I had actually written this part out. I'd revised it 4 times. Mom started this because she wanted me to have something real. You kept it going for 20 years because you promised her you would. The house was a gift. But the 20 years you spent maintaining it, the taxes, the repairs, the management fees, the account you never touched, that was also a gift. That wasn't legally required. You didn't have to do it. I promised her. I know. And I'm not trying to reimburse you like it was a transaction, because it wasn't. But I want to do something for you that isn't a transaction either. I took a breath. Your roof needs replacing. Your furnace needs servicing or replacement. And, this one you can argue with me about, I want to pay off whatever's left on your mortgage. Silence. Dad, what's left on the Akron house? A very long pause. 61,000. Give or take. Okay. I'm going to take care of that. Danny. Dad. My voice was steady. I was surprised by how steady it was. You carried this for 20 years. You carried it alone. You kept a promise to Mom for 20 years in silence, and it cost you money every single year, and you never asked me for anything. Let me do this. He didn't say anything for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, thicker, quieter. She would have liked how you turned out, he said. I didn't trust my voice after that, so I just said, I'll call the contractor this week. Update 4. 12 weeks after the letter. The conversations we had after the house sale were different from any we'd had in 20 years. Not because we became suddenly open people who talked easily about feelings. We didn't. We're both still stubborn, laconic men from Akron, but because the silence had changed texture. The old silence was avoidance. The new silence had something else in it. Space, maybe. Room. I hired the same contractor my father's neighbor used for roofing, a company out of Akron called Ridgeline Roofing and Exteriors. New architectural shingle roof. $14,200. The furnace was replaced through a local HVAC company. $4,100, including installation. I paid both invoices directly. My father argued with me exactly once about the furnace and then stopped arguing when I pointed out that he was 71 years old. It was February in Ohio, and the last thing either of us needed was for him to lose heat in the middle of winter because he was too proud to let me help. The mortgage payoff was a more delicate process, partly because my father's bank required specific forms and communication, and partly because my father kept insisting he wanted to contribute something from his own retirement funds to make it a partnership, he said. After some back and forth, we landed on an arrangement that I think honored both of us. I paid $50,000 toward the balance, reducing it to approximately $11,000, which he paid off himself over the following 4 months. It was his idea. He said he wanted to be part of closing it out. I didn't argue. I also did something that was purely for me. From the remaining proceeds, I maxed out my Roth IRA contribution for the year, added $30,000 to my investment portfolio, and set aside $25,000 in a high-yield savings account I've labeled, in my phone, simply, Mom. I don't know exactly what I'll use it for yet. Something real. Something she would have liked. Update 5, 16 weeks after the letter. I went to Akron last weekend. Not for a holiday, not because of an emergency, just because I wanted to. My father made pot roast. He's a decent cook when he tries, which is something I'd forgotten. We ate at his kitchen table, the same table where I'd sat as a kid doing homework while my mother made dinner, the same table where I'd gone through his manila folders of receipts 2 months ago. He'd gotten a new tablecloth, red and white checked, very aggressively cheerful, clearly purchased with zero input from anyone who had aesthetic opinions. Nice tablecloth, I said. Your aunt gave it to me for Christmas 4 years ago. Never had a reason to use it. And today you had a reason. He shrugged. You were coming over. We talked about things we hadn't talked about in years. My job, genuinely talked about it, not the surface version. His retirement, what it actually looked like on a day-to-day basis, which was better than I'd assumed and lonelier than he'd admit without prompting. He told me stories about my mother that I hadn't heard before, small ones, from their early marriage, before I was born. The kind of stories that flesh someone out beyond the role of parent. At one point he said, I've been thinking about whether I should have told you sooner. Whether I made the wrong call. You made a human call, I said. It wasn't perfect. But I understand why. She was right about one thing, he said. You would have refused it. I thought about 24-year-old me, living in that Pittsburgh studio, eating ramen, convinced I had to build everything myself from scratch. Yeah, I said. Probably. She knew you better than you knew yourself. That was probably true. After dinner we watched a college basketball game. He has opinions about Ohio State's defense that I'm not qualified to evaluate. I ate the last of the pot roast cold out of the container at halftime, standing over his kitchen counter, while he talked about a player's three-point percentage, and it occurred to me that this ordinary, easy, unremarkable evening, was something I hadn't had with my father in at least 15 years. Maybe longer. It is a strange thing to discover that the 20 years of silence between you and your father contained, hidden inside it, one of the most significant acts of care anyone has ever shown you. It doesn't undo the distance. It doesn't retroactively fill in the conversations that never happened or the years that evaporated. But it reframes things. It asks you to consider whether absence and love can coexist, whether people can care deeply and still fail to find a language, whether a promise made to a dying woman, kept quietly, faithfully, for 2 decades, at personal cost, with no expectation of recognition, counts as something. I've decided it does. I've also decided that knowing is better than not knowing, even when the knowing arrives late and complicated and wrapped in a county tax notice that almost ended up in the recycling bin. My mother bought me a house when she was still alive enough to plan ahead and generous enough to think about my future before she thought about her own comfort. My father maintained that house for 20 years and kept her secret and never once asked me for anything in return. I'm 44 years old. My mortgage is paid off. I have a new relationship with my father that has actual substance in it. My mother left me something real. She was right. I would have refused it. I'm glad I didn't get the chance. Edit. Yes, I cried writing this. Several times. No, I'm not going to specify when. Thanks for reading. If your relationship with a parent is complicated and unresolved and you keep thinking, someday we'll actually talk, maybe don't wait as long as we did. That's all. Edit 2. The Fig Newtons were store brand. He still buys store brand everything. I chose not to make this a hill to die on.